Hello and welcome. I'm Barry Harker and you're listening to Life Learnings. My guests today are Peter and Nerida Koolik. Peter and Nerida are volunteer missionary builders. In fact, Peter has built hundreds of churches or been involved in facilitating the building or modification of hundreds of buildings in Russia for churches and also in Mongolia. Nerida is a nurse and a midwife, and they have 3 children. And today they're going to be talking about their experience of Russia and also Mongolia. And then in the second part of the program, we'll look at their early lives and experience. Welcome, Peter and Nerida.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you today. Peter, I've heard your name over a number of years, but I've never had the privilege of meeting you, so it's lovely to catch up with you at last. Now, when you were in Russia, you had a pretty amazing coincidence or seeming coincidence. Who's going to tell me about that?
Okay, we were visiting in Tashkent, and we were asked to go to Alma-Ata, and the car, we were going in this car, and we knew that there was no fuel because of a fuel strike. So the pastor who was driving us put an extra cans of fuel in the boot, and after driving for, it's normally a one-day drive, a bit like from Sydney to Melbourne, and we used the very last can, and we were looking, and the pastor suddenly pulled into a little service station where 2 cars were, and he asked them, "Do you have any fuel?" And they said, no, there's nothing till Alma-Ata. And we thought, oh, what are we going to do? And he said, oh, my son has a friend who's got a car just like yours. And this pastor who was driving us said, is your son's name? And he named the fellow. And this man said, yes, that's right. Oh, what a coincidence. And he said, look, you need to get there so you can have the fuel out of my car. And he siphoned it out into our car, and we were able to get through to Alma-Ata that evening.
And this was like maybe 1,000 kilometres from where this pastor lived, and he'd never been to this place before. So, I mean, it wasn't a coincidence.
It was a miracle.
That we were at that place, he was at that place at that time, and so far away from home, but yet we met and he recognised the vehicle.
And even when we got to Alma-Ata, they said, how did you drive all that way? Because there's no fuel. We know there's no fuel along the way.
It's not a coincidence, is it really, when you think about it? No. I hear too many stories like this to think that they're just coincidences. Peter, how did you come to be doing this building work and coordination work in Russia? You're a builder, a carpenter in Australia. You've got a prosperous business. How did you come to be doing this in Russia, and when did this all start?
Barry, in 1989, our family decided to take a once-in-a-lifetime trip in a motorhome through Europe. The Soviet Union, of course, was still intact at that stage, and we spent 3 months in the former Soviet Union. My background is actually from Russian parents, so it was really interesting for me to go to Russia for the first time, to hear the language that I was familiar with. And we travelled for 3 months through the Soviet Union. And at that stage I said to my wife, I've got some sort of tug to my heart was sort of kind of saying, look, it would be good to go back there and be involved, to help the people there, to somehow be involved in church construction or in some sort of humanitarian construction there at that time. So we came back to Australia, and again, it as if it wasn't a coincidence, I'm sure, that 2 years later, the Soviet Union had just collapsed. 1992, we went back there in January 92, and at the end of 91, the Soviet Union had collapsed. So we were asked by a contact of a friend, would you be prepared to go and volunteer 12 months in Russia to do construction work at a educational institution? And we agreed to that, and we went, and that was the best decision of our lives.
You wouldn't have expected in 1989 that you would be back there in 1992, would you?
No, as I say, it wasn't a coincidence, I'm sure. And
that period you were there back in 1992 would have been a period of tremendous transition in Russia. What was the difference between your experience of 1989 and 1992 in Russia? What were the noticeable things?
There was more freedom. Of course, in '89 it was still a communist system. We actually had people in our motorhome following us. We had to have the routing pre-approved through the visa section of the Russian or the Soviet foreign ministry. And we had just many funny experiences when we were in a big motorhome which we bought from England. We travelled. We had a big kangaroo cut out on the back of our motor vehicle, and these vehicles were just not seen in the Soviet Union during those days. And we knew that we were looked after well in the Soviet Union during those times. But when we got there in '92, we could see the enthusiasm of the people, the freedom, the longing for Western things, and that, of course, can be a good thing and a bad thing. But especially it seemed to be a spiritual longing for Christianity, for information about God, and it just there was obviously more freedom and the ability for people to think for themselves and to be involved in attending meetings and for being fed the gospel. And that was the noticeable thing, probably.
My wife and I were in Russia in 1995 on an evangelistic team, and we went to the city of Ufa in the Republic of Bashkiria, and we had a similar sort of experience. We felt a tremendous hunger for the gospel, a tremendous hunger for things that had been suppressed in Russia for a lengthy period of time. And indeed, I understand you were in Russia in 95 too.
Yes, we were.
But our paths didn't cross. But let's go back to 1992, and you're at Zayorsky, which is south of Moscow, and this is where the Seventh Adventist Church had its seminary.
Correct.
Tell me about how you got the new buildings going there.
We arrived there in 1992. I remember it was maybe minus 22 degrees. It was a totally new experience for us, coming from warm Queensland. It was a quick learning experience for us. We were asked to build a large dormitory building, a 4-story dormitory building. And a church was included in that. We had about 120 construction workers on site. And, of course, looking after those workers, they came from Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They came from all over the former Soviet Union. Not all of them were Christians. We had issues with discipline probably, and with having that many construction workers that you've got to accommodate all their needs, not only their physical needs but also, I guess, emotional needs. That was part of the challenge, but things worked out well. The Lord seemed to always provide us with the strength and the opportunities to face the challenges and to solve the problems that we had. We were certainly dependent on the Lord a lot more than in my secular business here back in Queensland. You just depend on the Lord to put out the fires, to help you put out the fires, and to find the solutions that you need to do. And every day there was always new challenges, new fires to put out. That was the way it was back then. Those
buildings that you built there are very beautiful buildings. There was an initial building there, but just looking at them, they're superb buildings.
Yeah,
lovely buildings.
They were designed by architects in Moscow, and the architecture, it's very unique, and we put a lot of emphasis on making the buildings fit into the environment, and they're very attractive buildings.
Now, Nerida, what was your role? How did you fit into all of this, and how did you find going back to Russia in 92?
In 92, our children were, 9, 11 and 13 during that first year. I was very enthusiastic the first year, and I was asked to teach English at the seminary, so I did that for one semester. But then I thought, I'm going to just concentrate on the children and do some homeschooling with them. And And during that first year also, the children and myself went to the local school and to learn the Russian language. And that was very difficult because our teachers spoke only Russian and we spoke only English. So we started with grade 1 work.
And the children picked up the language pretty well, I hear.
Yes, they did, yeah.
It's a lovely language, isn't it, Russian? It reminds me of French. It's got a lovely lilt to it in a way. And in that period of 92 to 94, Peter, you were involved in coordinating or building or modifying 400 buildings.
The first year, Barry, we were stationed at the seminary, and that was we worked full-time at Zolsky. So I wasn't involved in anything other than, in 92, other than the construction of the dormitory building and the church and the infrastructure there. However, at the end of 92, we initially went for 12 months. We were asked to stay on and coordinate from a makeshift headquarters in Moscow that we were renting, the purchase of a new division office building and to plan that. And my other job, of course, was to coordinate the development and construction, facilitate, about 400 churches over the next 2 years.
That must have been a very satisfying thing to accomplish, to see these buildings modified into churches and churches going up and new congregations being established.
It was. Primarily because, during communist times, there were virtually no church buildings at all. It was obviously a communist system. The Orthodox Church had some buildings, and we had 1 or 2 buildings located throughout the Soviet Union, but so the doors were opened and the opportunities were there. We had donors who were willing to donate. We had the General Conference of our church put a lot of funding and emphasis on that. So we built up a team. We had a great team there, and we were able to build new buildings and also, as you say, facilitate purchasing properties, renovating, extending, and coordinating this. Of course, we had representatives in most republics that reported back to us, and they travelled on the train day and night pretty much covering all these territories, and it was a mammoth task, but it was very satisfying.
What happened after 1994? Did you come back to Australia for a period?
We came back to Australia for a period of probably 6 months, I guess, and during that time I commuted back to Russia to try and find a location for our headquarters division office building, and we found that in November of 94, and then we moved back permanently again. I think it might have been at the end of 94 or certainly January of 95, and that's when we started to build our new headquarters building.
When was that headquarters building finished?
It was finished in November, I think, on the 11th or 13th of November. It was dedicated. It was a big event, and the building has got facilities for permanent accommodation, 28 apartments on top. It had a cafeteria, kitchen at the back, so it's a presentable building. The high-rise around the building is a virtually 22, 25-storey building, so it's in an area that you wouldn't find too much in the West, but because of the high-rise, it certainly gives you an opportunity to be able to reach out to the community.
I remember those buildings because my wife and I went to worship there every morning for a few days while we were in Moscow. I remember also that they had guards at the entrance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a gated community.
Gated community.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after 95, what happened then? 95,
we came back permanently to live in Australia, but I continued on there. It's very difficult to extract yourself from a position that you're very enthusiastic about, and secondly, it got to the stage where the donors, the private donors, were happy with what was happening, and they really requested that I come back and continue supervising their funded programs.
So were you travelling back to Russia?
I travelled back to Russia 5-6 times a year for, I guess, a period of until about 2004. My daughter actually took my eldest daughter grabbed one of my passports, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the passport that covered the 1990s, and she counted that I went to Russia, I think, 60 times during that 10-year period.
Were you going with him, Nerida, at that point?
Occasionally, if there was a church dedication or some opening of like the multi-purpose building in Zalewski, I would go with him. It was rather exciting then.
I would encourage her to come to these occasions because she was an integral part, really, of my service there. Not only we lived there, but looking after the family, and she was always on her knees praying and supporting us. So I felt really important for her to be there for, I guess, some of the emotional times where she could also appreciate the happiness and the satisfaction that we had from some of these occasions.
Russia's a pretty amazing place, isn't it, really? When you think about it, it's so almost completely different to our Australian culture.
Mm-hmm.
Russian people are very, very strong, intelligent. It's just and the climate and the landscape is just
they're very well read.
Amazing.
They're very
cultured.
The arts, it's a whole different culture. It's something that you really need to experience to appreciate.
And they love their music and singing. It's just part of their lives. So after you've finished this period, what is happening? You mentioned before that before our interview this afternoon, you mentioned that you actually had been on a 300 program. What was that about?
Yeah, I think maybe in about 97, the administration of the division over there, they really felt that they needed to spread Christianity, I guess, in unentered areas, because there are many regions of Russia specifically and I guess Kazakhstan and Ukraine where Christianity still hasn't had the opportunity to evolve. So they were very active in going out and ministering in many of these areas. They earmarked 300 locations in the former Soviet Union where they felt people would accept Christianity. So we again were involved in the facilitating 300 more buildings, 300 evangelistic campaigns, and that was really a successful initiative, and it was achieved within a period of 3 years.
So you've had involvement with around 700 buildings in Russia.
Yeah.
That's a significant achievement. It must have been pretty satifying to be involved in all of this.
It was, especially when, it was such a time, as I say, where there's such enthusiasm, such a vacuum really in spiritual influence, and it was so good to see the emotion, the passion of people when they have a permanent building where they can come and worship. Because prior to that, when we first arrived in Moscow, for instance, there was, I think, maybe 10 or maybe 8 congregations, and they were continually shifting from one rented palace of culture or theatre to another, and they'd come to one place one Saturday morning when they worshipped, and I'm sorry, the building's been taken over by somebody else. This is the new address you have to go to, and they'd worship there for a month, and then they would say, oh, you have to move on to somewhere else for another month. So the stability really meant that people got discouraged, and they really needed permanent places, and this gave them that stability.
Mm. Now, you were a Russian speaker.
Yes.
Your parents spoke Russian at home.
Yes.
And your experience of Russia would have been different then, because speaking the language always opens doors and does things that perhaps not speaking it does. Nerida, tell me about your experience of Russia, not being a Russian speaker.
Well, during that first year, I learnt the basics, going to the school with the children 1 hour every day from Monday to Friday. So soon I could pick up a phone or answer a phone and work out what they were saying to me. But it is a very difficult language.
What was your shopping experience like? I can recall moving from one little shop to another. They're all called supermarkets, but going all over town to get your shopping.
Yes.
What was it like for you, shopping?
It was an adventure, a challenge. We would soon find out where the little local market was, and we would basically buy fruit and vegetables there. We would soon work out that if we saw something, you needed it maybe in a month's time or a few weeks, you'd buy it because it wouldn't be there later on. Sometimes, I remember once we couldn't get eggs, and Peter drove all the way from Zalewski to Moscow to find some eggs because we're having visitors, and because Easter was coming up a few weeks later, there was just no eggs. So there was always shortages, and I think because everybody knew that, people created shortages by buying everything that they saw, and you hoarded,
Yes.
Yeah.
What was the experience? Did you go on public transport at all there?
Yes.
What was your experience of public transport?
When we lived in Moscow, we used the metro. It was just amazing. You never had to run for a train because they would come every 30 seconds to a minute. And it was a really efficient system, people mover.
How did you manage the cold, the transition between inside the buildings and outside and then back into the buildings again?
Before you left a building, before we left our apartment, we would always look out the window at the thermometer and see what temperature it was, and then you could dress accordingly. And you soon learned, because often if you went out without enough warm clothes, you didn't stay out long, you'd come back, redress and go out again.
I also found that if you put too much on and you didn't peel it off in time,
Yes.
you'd end up with all of your clothing soaked with perspiration. So it took a little while to just manage those simple things that people have to do every day. How did your children experience Russia? I know they picked up the language quickly.
They loved it. They talk about it now even. They had so much fun. They met other expat children and local children, whom they could talk with after a while. When we're in the village of Zolsky, they would go after their class, their schooling. In the morning, they would just go out into the forest. In the afternoon, they'd make cubby houses and collect flowers in the summer. And
they were by themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a safe environment, Barry. We never felt threatened. The communist system was very rigid, and there was so much discipline. And I mean, things obviously are a little different now, but we just let them go and play on their own. Maybe half a kilometre away, and felt totally safe for them to go and play in the bush and make their cubby houses. And
we wouldn't see them for hours and didn't think anything of it. They'd come back full of life and muddy and
very muddy. That was one issue that Nerida was quite irritated about at times. Our youngest boy was 9, and our house, when the snow thaws, I mean, -5 degrees is great, but
yes.
+2 degrees when there's just mud everywhere.
The snow melting.
And he had gumboots on, and he'd come in and change because he fell in the mud how many times a day,
His boots would stick in the mud, and then he'd go to push it out, and then when he'd pull his foot out, it'd knock him over.
And there it had to do a washing by hand, of course, so it was, I remember it was a challenging time with you saying, oh, don't get so dirty every time.
Did you have the experience of going to the Sunday markets?
Oh, yes. It was a weekly thing every Sunday to go, because there wasn't much to buy during the week.
I know that the children there tend to learn a number of different languages. I think most of them are learning German and English as well as Russian, at least German and English. So they're very cosmopolitan. Now, coming back to the buildings themselves, what were some of the challenges, Peter, that you had to face in a different culture, different climate, in terms of building from your experience in Australia?
It's a totally different building. Neat, of course. The buildings at that stage, we didn't have a lot of Western building materials. We still the communist system had just broken down. Importing from the West still wasn't really available. The walls were about 2 foot or 600 millimetres thick, total brick construction, so they just lay the brick all the way through, and that was the insulation they had. These days, of course, we use insulation, and it's a lot more efficient. But back then, that's the way we built. So You'd use so many bricks, they'd come up with a dump truck, dump the bricks out. Of course, they were poor quality, so you'd lose a lot of them that were damaged, but you still use most of those by throwing them in the centre of the wall. And same with concrete. The concrete was all mixed on by hand on site, no concrete trucks. You had to barter for a lot of your material during those days because things were done in an irregular way, really. You couldn't just go down and buy something. You had to actually stop a truck sometimes and say, what are you carrying? And he'd say, we've got lumber here that's going to go out to a mill somewhere. And so, well, you'd stop and you'd trade and you'd work out a price. He'd come out and he'd supply it, and the person to whom he was going to deliver it would have to just wait and do the same with somebody else, I guess. So, and the thing that stands out to me was in those early years, inflation was really at a high level. So you would only change, we had dollars we worked with, you only change enough dollars to last you for a day or a day and a half, sometimes only hours, because the ruble was just dropping its value so readily that the financial issues also were challenging at times. The recording, the accounting, because this all meant, I remember a friend of ours had $100 in ruble notes, and he had it in a big sack, and he carried it on his shoulder and come into our apartment and says, there's $100 in 5 ruble notes. And it was just like a whole big sack of potatoes now, and it was just there. It was interesting to see the inflation, and the economy was still struggling in those days.
What about money for you? This is a time-consuming thing to be a volunteer on these major projects. How did you survive financially?
Look, prior to that, we were blessed in my business. I'm a builder, developer from Queensland, and we were involved in construction of home units. And we were fortunate enough to be able to fund our own time over there. We had a volunteer stipend. I think it might have been $100 or $150 a month, which of course, but really things were so inexpensive in Russia in those days. We'd go to the circus, it would be equivalent of 5 or 10 cents maybe. The metro, the same, maybe 5 or 10 cents. So things were very inexpensive in those initial days. But the Lord always provided for us, and we were able to survive without any problem.
When you weren't working, what were you doing, apart from sleeping and going to church and so forth? What did you do for recreation in Russia?
He didn't stop working. We'd go for walks in the forest. Sometimes when he went visiting different churches in different areas of the Soviet Union, I'd go to, or the children would go, and you meet the local church folk, and they'd show you the local area. What we'd do is, in the winter we bought kids ice skates, and they played ice hockey on the frozen lakes, and some skis, so they could go even skiing or sledding through the forests or on little hills. And
I didn't have a lot of downtime.
No, you didn't.
But Nerida and the kids especially just assimilated really well with the locals, and they just made their own fun. They played, sunset sometimes was in the summertime at 10 o'clock in the evening. So they would play, and they would pick up language. And they've got such great memories of the time they had there. They felt really blessed having the opportunities to have that freedom to be able to just go and play till all hours, knowing everything's safe and secure. And there was no television, there was no Nintendo or Game Boys or whatever. They were just out, and they were just having a great time. As I say, it was just a perfect environment for them to grow up in. Must
have been a great time for you as a family.
It was. A very bonding, very close time.
Sounds idyllic. Tell me about Mongolia. How did you come to be involved in Mongolia? Was this an extension of what you've been doing in Russia?
We came back. I ceased my involvement in Russia and the former Soviet Union because I really felt they had adequate facilities, and also our kids needed to come back and have some regular schooling. So we came back, I think, I ceased my work there in maybe 2004 or 2003. We came back, and I stepped back in my business shoes back home and continued active construction. And then our local community church up in Kaborcha in Queensland went to a place called Bulgan in Mongolia in 2004, 2005. And then they said, look, we really need to build a church community centre in that place. And they called on us to go and help them do that. So we grabbed a team of volunteers. I was able to pull support from Ukraine and Russia, from the contacts I had there. And we were able to build a very representative building in the city of Bulgan over a 4 or 5 month period we lived in Mongolia. And that, again, gave us the inspiration and I guess the enthusiasm to be involved in Mongolia.
That's a very beautiful building as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's probably the most representative building in the city of Bulgan, yeah. And the government officials actually use it for some of their official functions. Although it's a church, they're very happy to accept it and for visiting dignitaries to have their occasions there.
So what year are we up to now?
That was 2005 or 6? 2006.
So the children are getting on. Are they at home or are they studying, or what are they doing at this time?
Well, they're all married.
At this point, yeah.
Yes, our eldest daughter, we came back from during the time of building the church at Bulgan, and she was having her first child.
Now, the time they had in Russia obviously didn't impact on their education negatively. Tell me about where your kids have gone educationally.
Our eldest daughter is, she's in education, and she is presently in America for a few years writing a Bible curriculum for years 11 and 12 over there.
These are for Adventist schools?
For Adventist schools.
Mm-hmm.
Our second daughter is also a teacher, and she teaches part-time at an Adventist school in Brisbane. And our son is a lawyer.
So that time away didn't impact on their careers or anything in a negative way, did it?
I think they grew substantially.
Nerida initially had a formal program for the kids in Zalski, a distance education program. And she used to actually send tapes back and the classes back, but we found that by the time they got to Australia and were marked and come back, and then they were checked usually by the authorities before they let them back. And so it was a period of months before we got that. And so she eventually said, look, we just need to abandon that option. And so yeah, she homeschooled the kids, but
they applied themselves, and I think
that was self-motivated.
That now they're also really self-motivated.
And our eldest daughter, who's now working for the North American division in the schools, she had 2.5 years of formal schooling, but
in high school.
But I don't think that impacted really on her academic achievements, because she had the experience, the learning experiences of life. I think really give you that balance and that cultural sensitivity, and she was able to pick up her studies when she came back in the middle of year 11, and she did okay eventually in year 12. So. Of course, there will probably be those educators who would say you can't do that. But I think it depends on the kids and probably their motivation to a certain extent as well.
That real life learning is very powerful stuff, really. I think the experience of being in Russia and experiencing Russia as a different culture would have been very powerful in their, as a formative influence for them.
Yeah,
makes them much more cosmopolitan, I think.
Yeah. And tolerant of others.
And it's not as if they didn't do any schoolwork. They were still doing their distance education, but they were self-motivated. I'm
not surprised that they're disciplined, because both of you are clearly disciplined to be able to do what you've done. I guess some of that has rubbed off on them. Would you say that?
Yeah, I suppose children are a product of their parents.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Now, tell me about Mongolia. What's the difference between working in Mongolia and working in Russia? Because I understand that many people in Mongolia speak Russian.
Sure, well,
part of the former Soviet Union.
It wasn't an official part of the former Soviet Union, but it was really a 16th republic of the Soviet Union. It was a communist state, heavily influenced by Russia, or by the Soviet Union. And communism only fell there, of course, same as 1991. They became an independent country. Building standards and the type of building are very similar to Siberia in Russia. Again, very cold country. Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, is the coldest capital city in the world. Temperatures go down to minus 55, minus 57. So, again, the buildings are virtually ice boxes or ice chests or whatever in regard to the insulation. The bureaucracy is probably similar to Russia, with approvals and with the contacts or personal relationships you have to have with the city authorities. I found it quite interesting that most of the governors and the mayors of the places we built in Mongolia do speak Russian. They're the older generation who came up through that system, and the schooling was virtually a Russian schooling. And of course, when you deal with those people, they tend to be softer and more understanding, and accept you more when you speak in a language that they understand. So that was something that really was of benefit to me, speaking Russian to them.
Are you still involved with Mongolia?
Yes, we are. Just the last year we built 4 community centres in the regional parts of Mongolia. This year I'm going back in a month to build a large multi-purpose building just an hour out of Ulaanbaatar, which will be a training centre and eventually a seminary for theology students and other students, education, etc. from the Mongolian mission that we have there.
My sister was there just a few years ago with an evangelistic team, and so I have a couple of artefacts from Mongolia to remind me of her visit there. How many buildings have you built there now?
7, Barry. These are all community buildings. We have most of the buildings are of one design. They have an apartment at the back, a 2-bedroom apartment for the local worker and his family, and then in the middle we have a dedicated room for community activities and initiatives. ADRA is involved in, which is
ADRA being
Adventist Development and Relief Agency, which is a NGO, a non-government organisation who are independent of the church. They just are out there helping communities, and they are leasing parts of these buildings to have initiatives for
physically challenged children.
Physically challenged children and the children like that usually aren't too readily accepted, I guess, in that culture. They're hidden away, and so ADRA is really trying to change that and make a difference with having them accepted and teaching them how to I guess live a more natural life than they would otherwise.
Now you're retired now, Peter.
Yes,
so you can spend full time on this if you want to.
we retired just I guess a few weeks ago. And we're able to serve and do the things. The kids are obviously off our hands. We have 8 grandchildren, so we obviously enjoy spending time with them, Barry. But we're committed to continuing our passion, which is volunteer work, in wherever the Lord takes us, really.
Well, we're going to go to a break now. When we come back, I'll be talking with Peter and Nerida about their lives, particularly their early lives, and what they've learned from their lives.
If you have any questions or comments in relation to today's program, you can call 3ABN Australia Radio within Australia on 02 4973 3456, or from outside of Australia on country code 612 4973 3456. Our email address is radio@3abnaustralia.org.au. That is radio@3ABN Australia, all one word, .org.au. Our postal address is 3ABN Australia Inc., PO Box 752, Morisset, New South Wales 2264 Australia. Thank you for your prayers and financial support.
If you've just joined us, I'm Barry Harker and you're listening to Life Learnings. My guests today are Peter and Nerida Koolik. We've been talking about Russia and Mongolia and their work in building churches and institutions there. Tell me about yourself, Peter. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell me a bit about your family as well.
Sure. My mother's granddad on the side of was from St. Petersburg, Russia, and on my dad's side from Poltava near Kiev in the Ukraine. When my grandfather from St. Petersburg was 16, he was actually expelled from his home because he became a Christian, a Seventh-day Adventist, and his father was extremely distressed with that. Bought him a one-way ticket to Vladivostok on the other side of Russia. And there he actually attended an Adventist church. When communism came to Russia in 1919, there are a whole bunch of millions of white Russians fled communism into China. And my parents were actually born in China, both of them. My dad was born in Harbin. Mum was born in Tsingtao. And when communism came to China in 1945, in 1946 actually, they immigrated to Australia. I was born in Australia, in Sydney, into a Russian-speaking family, spoke Russian fluently. Our Russian was the primary language spoken at home until I went to school. I picked up English, of course. And then went to school in Castle Hill, then back in Stratfield in Sydney. Met my wife.
Were these Adventist schools?
Adventist schools, yes. Both were Adventist schools. And then I pretty much lost the language from a speaking perspective. My parents always spoke to me in Russian. I replied in English because it was obviously a lot easier for me. So I can understand Russian perfectly, but I found that speaking, I lost it pretty much until we went to Russia, and it was still there. So after a few months, I was able to pick it up, and obviously I became fluent again.
Nerida, what about you?
Okay, my father's side had German heritage, my great-great-grandfather, and my mother's side English. But I was born in Australia, in Sydney. I went to an Adventist school, primary school, and then I went to Strathfield High School, and that's where I met Peter in grade 7.
Tell me about your initial relationship.
Oh, he was just a guy who played football and a bit of a hooligan.
I wasn't really academically inclined, Barry. Nerida was the goody-goody, I guess, of our class. And she was very popular, you might say, I guess, and I was an outsider. So, of course, I had eyes on her from the beginning, but, yeah, I was more interested in football and sport and just hanging with the boys. But I guess about probably near
Year 10, we started
dating.
dating.
10, I kept pursuing her, and eventually she succumbed, I guess. Although soon after she moved to, because of her dad's work as a pastor, she moved to Victoria, and then we continued our relationship by post.
Yeah, and then when I finished Year 12, I came back to Sydney and did nursing at the Sydney Adventist Hospital. Back then it was a Sydney Sanitarium and Hospital. And on the very first day there, he looked me up and kept asking me out until eventually I succumbed.
So when did you marry?
1974 we married, and I was halfway through my nursing. We're only 20.
And I was still doing my carpentry apprenticeship in carpentry. I went on to year 10, year 12 rather, but I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't academically inclined at all, and I took up carpentry and also did building and certificate and building inspector certificate tech, although I really enjoyed that and I did quite well at that. It's amazing how when you have an interest, you can apply yourself. And Nerida, of course, was always fairly academic, and she continued on to do midwifery.
So you have children quickly?
We have 3 children, a girl, boy, girl.
And what were your plans, your motivation when you were younger? Did you have any goal for your lives, the two of you together?
When you're young, you don't. You just motor along, don't you? But we did actually, soon after we were married, wanted to do a year volunteers somewhere out in the islands, but they wanted us to start in January, and we weren't finishing our courses till February, so that just sort of fell by the way until some years later, when we had all the 3 children, the opportunity came up to go to Russia. I
always had the desire, I guess, to be immersed in another culture, coming from an ethnic family, that were virtually refugees. I think I always had that inbuilt desire to be involved and to learn and to experience another culture. I guess it wasn't a yearning to have a missionary experience. It was more to have a life experience.
Yes.
And just so happened that the Lord led us in a particular direction, a particular time, and we grabbed it, and it was, as I said before, the best thing that happened to us.
So you were open to volunteer service, but the right opportunity hadn't just arrived at that time.
And probably financially also, we weren't in a position to be able to take full advantage of any opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think just getting a bit of experience behind you, getting a family, prepares you for the sorts of things that you're going to experience when you go overseas as a volunteer. Has your motivation ever changed from the time that you first went to Russia Has it deepened and grown?
Yes, it has. No question about that. You know, once it gets in your blood, Barry, it's there forever. I think. You know, we have a desire to continue serving, continue doing what we can to make a difference. The blessings you have from serving like that are just immeasurable. The network of friends you build up, the close experience with our family. The satisfaction you see in people's faces, the emotion, the passion of them being involved in having the facilities that they have. It's just such a blessing and such an edifying experience, I guess. You know, why would you want to deny yourself more of that if, in fact, you're making a difference? And as I say, the difference really is that we're blessed more than they are blessed because you know the
when you give to others, it comes back
tenfold.
More, yes.
And that's actually the way it's been financially with us as well. To be honest with you, you know, the Lord seems to have guided us and channeled our lives. We look back and we think, wow, that the times we were actually serving is the times that were most rewarding for us, not only from a perspective of physical or spiritual, but financial as well. I could go into that further, but I guess it's not that important. But you know, we can see that the Lord has blessed us immensely during the time we've served.
Tell me about your relationship with God and how that may have developed over the years.
Yeah, I guess I was born into a Christian home, a fairly conservative but deeply spiritual home, and I thank the Lord for that. I guess the life-changing experiences are the ones that where we have experienced Christ's leading and the miracles and the closeness that we get when you depend on Him in circumstances that are challenging, and that certainly draws you closer to God personally and as a family, and you just become dependent on the Lord every morning, continually in prayer, and it's certainly been a life changer for us. The opportunities we had to be involved in mission service spiritually. I mean,
tell me what impact Nerida had on your spiritual life.
She's still got an impact now, continual impact on me. The support that she gives me in every way. I couldn't. I mean. Who would have imagined when we first went to school that this would happen? It's a dream come true for us, really.
Now, you described her as a goodie before.
She was a goodie. She still is a goodie, and I guess she's straightened me out as well, really.
So I'm going to ask Nerida, what was your spiritual experience? I mean, being the daughter of a pastor, I guess there were certain social expectations, religious expectations.
Yes, I think you just grow as you get older. And the more I find my lowest times were when I didn't spend time in prayer and Bible study and trying to do things by myself. So I've learnt to spend, a certain time in the morning every day for just Bible study and prayer, and it gets me through the day, and it just makes me grow spiritually, and I just know there's a God out there who loves me and cares for us.
What was the impact of having 3 beautiful kids on your spirituality?
How do we answer that? I don't know. It was our family certainly grew closer spiritually, and I look at them and I praise the Lord for their commitment as well. As I say, the experience made a huge impact on them as well. Spiritually, because we were tied together. By Australian standards, probably the seminary was a very conservative worship style, but we just appreciated it all so much. And it doesn't matter really what the worship style is. Your relationship with God is what matters. And I think the kids certainly just got so much out of the time that we spent in Russia spiritually. And I just, as I said before, I praise the Lord for that opportunity.
They're very close to each other and to us, and they've got that missionary spirit even now.
And on their kids, on our grandkids, we can see the generational impact, I guess, because they all committed. Our grandkids are being led along that missionary spirit as well. And it's something that not only us, that we have benefited from. We can see the benefit in further generations.
You see the blessings going down through the generations, don't you? That for those who are faithful to God, have a relationship with Him, the blessings don't just stop with you. They go through your children and onto your grandchildren and so forth. Giving your children a firm foundation of spirituality and an example of service, and that very powerful on children.
Yeah, our middle daughter, Tatiana, she spent a year, 2 years ago, in Ukraine as a volunteer again with her 2 kids and her husband.
For 12 months.
12 months. And they look back at that as saying this is something that has enriched our lives so much. They want to continue doing that. They were both school teachers at the time. And our eldest daughter also is serving now in the States. Our son, he's got his legal practice, which ties him down somewhat, but he's also involved heavily in community work, and it's had a huge impact on their lives, I think.
Now, you were both born in Sydney, but you're living in Queensland now. You've been there for quite some time. I think that was related to your work initially, wasn't it, that shift?
Yes, it was. I was a carpenter builder, and I had quite severe back problem issues, and at that time I was advised to give that away for a while. I fortunately had the backup of education as a building inspector, building surveyor. So I took up a desk job in Queensland, and I was able. My back had an opportunity to recover.
So you're retired in Queensland. You're staying there in Queensland for your retirement.
Well, our kids and our grandkids are there. So I think that's at the time.
At this stage, yes.
Yeah, at the moment. Well, last year we pretty much retired in Mongolia. So who knows where we'll retire temporarily, but our base is in Queensland. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask you for your favourite Bible passages, and Peter, you're first.
Sure. My mother passed away when she was 62, and this was also her favourite Bible text. It's found in Job 19:25, and it goes like this: "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth." And that, of course, gives me so much encouragement. I was very close to my mum, and it gives me so much encouragement for the future to know that we'll meet again, and that our Redeemer liveth, and that we can depend on him.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully comforting thought, isn't it?
And mine is found in Isaiah 40, verse 31. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not be faint." It's just a beautiful text. In Mongolia we often see the eagles soaring over the landscape, and it just reminds me how much the Lord gives us our strength every day.
Beautiful verse too. I can understand why that one would be a favourite. I mean, the thought that as you get older and you lose physical capacity and so forth, the thought that one day we're going to die if the Lord hasn't returned, and that there will be a resurrection and we'll be restored to that capacity. That's an amazing thought, a very comforting thought.
Comforting, yeah.
Now, Peter, tell me what you have learned. You've had vast experience across cultures. Tell me what you've learned from your life that really stands out, something that you think everyone ought to know.
Depend on the Lord, really. We have had the experience where we've had so many times when things have really seemed difficult, seemed challenging in the work that we've done, and you put it in the Lord's hands. You don't allow yourself to stress, to feel, I guess, as if it's beyond you. But if you rely on the Lord, it'll work out. I think of one time in particular where, or many times, but one time in particular when we were out of food, out of oil, out of a whole bunch of provisions in Zalska when we lived in the first year. And we were on our knees. We had kids to look after. The food was limited, and it was the Lord provided the same day that we really ran out of a lot of stuff. And a container came to Moscow, and then we were able to get some stuff. And somehow, in that environment, you depend on the Lord. But bigger than that, I guess, serving gives you so many blessings. Up until we went to Russia, I was involved in business and our regular lifestyle. But after we had the opportunity to go to Russia, our life changed, and we had different perspectives, different priorities, I guess, and the Lord just gave us so many more blessings that I would say to anybody, if you have the opportunity to be able to go and serve, to be involved in service for community and for people to get to know God, just grab it with both hands, because it just makes such a difference in your life.
What about you, Nerida? What have you learned from your life that you think we should know?
I also think what Peter said about trusting God with all your heart. I like to think that we should thank him through prayer for all the blessings that he gives us every day. And I like to share this love with others wherever I can. That's my thoughts.
Nerida, you're going to close our conversation with prayer today.
Mm-hmm.
I know there'll be people who have listened who will have maybe had similar experiences to you, or worked overseas in different cultures and so forth. I wonder if you would like to just pray for our listeners generally, but also for those who specifically might have had the sorts of experiences that you've had as well in the past.
Mm-hmm. Kind Heavenly Father, we just uphold you now as our eternal Lord and Saviour, and we just thank you for the experiences in our lives. We pray for those that are missionaries right now out throughout the world, and even those here in Australia. And Lord, if people are finding things difficult, may they just always lean upon you, because you are always there for them. And we just give you praise and honour and thanks for this time spent with you just now. And thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. It's been really wonderful meeting you today, both of you. As I said right at the very beginning, Peter, I've heard your name over 20 years now, and I've not had the privilege of meeting you till today, but I really want to just express my appreciation to you. I think your story is very inspirational to me, the sorts of things that you've done in your career, the willingness to put your own career and prosperity on the line to go and do something for other people, to make other people feel better, to give them a place to worship, to stabilise their lives in that way. I think that's a really wonderful thing you've done. So all blessings to you for that.
Thank you, Barry. As I said, I think the blessings really, the Lord has given us the blessings, and we've actually had the benefit rather than probably given the benefit. We've had the benefit. So thanks for you.
Well, it's been a privilege to meet you both.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
And it's lovely to make new friends like that. I'm Barry Harker, and you've been listening to Life Learnings. Remember to tune in again next time as I speak to another fascinating guest or guests. Bye for now, and God bless you and keep you.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.